It is said that the first race riots in North America took place in Nova Scotia in 1784. There's a history of racism in Canada. Racism, bigotry, and worst of all, genocide. That history is not over. It is ongoing. In 1998, the last of the residential schools was closed. During the 60s scoop where Indigenous children were taken from their families, astronomical rates, and adopted out to white families took place. Both the residential schools and the 60s scoop were acts of cultural erasure, ways for Canada as a nation to take Indigenous children, remove them from their families, their language, their culture. That is what we call cultural genocide. As recently as 2018, First Nations women have come forward about doctors in the medical industry forcing them to be sterilized, an act of physical genocide. In 2019, snipers arrived on the lands of Wet'suwet'en to face off against peaceful Indigenous defenders who were stopping a gas company from coming in, an oil company from coming in to build a pipeline through their unceded territory. Those snipers were RCMP officers. They were sanctioned by the Canadian government. Those RCMP officers ended up arresting numerous peaceful Indigenous defenders just for the act of defending their land. Now in 2020, white settler fishermen are destroying the property of Indigenous Mi'kmaq fishermen in Nova Scotia, so-called Nova Scotia. They hide behind the claim that these fishermen don't have a right to fish during this time of year, but by the constitutionally upheld treaties we have had with Mi'kmaq people, they have every right to fish. Excuses are being made to muddy the water around what is white terrorism. Burning cars, burning boats, stealing and destroying the traps they need to fish, burning down their building. I think we need to be extremely grateful that at this point the only thing the Mi'kmaq have done is try to defend their traps and have peaceful protests. I don't know that it would be unjustified for them to get more angry, but I also don't know that they have that option. The whole country is acting, the country as a nation, as a system, acts against them. Just look at how the RCMP and the police have responded. As I mentioned, how they responded out in Wet'suwet'en. Here, they do nothing. They stand by. They've allowed these white fishermen to attack and assault Mi'kmaq people. The Department of Fisheries and Oceans has itself shut down its phones, has failed to really come forward to help mediate this conflict. Essentially, the government has taken its hands off and is allowing white supremacists to deal with the issue for them. One interesting video shows Chief Mike Sack and a fisherman named Joel Camo attempting to negotiate despite the government's failure, but that still fails to prevent the white fishermen from taking violent action against peaceful Mi'kmaq fishermen. Many of these white fishermen are Acadian, and as early as 2018, Acadians were speaking out against the weakening bond between them and the Mi'kmaq people. Because back into the 1700s, when Britain was violently expelling Acadians from the east coast of Canada, the Mi'kmaq came to their support and defended them. There are Acadians who have spoken up about this. And there are Mi'kmaq who are now speaking up about whether or not that bond has been broken. And none of these groups are monoliths. So, one person speaking out in the group says not that the whole group agrees, but that there is a shift. It acknowledges that there is a changing dynamic taking place. So whether or not that bond is broken, that's not for me to decide. That's for those communities. But it does show that there is a weakening solidarity between the groups. The fact is that in the West, it's Coastal GasLink, supported by the RCMP and the government, who are harming First Nations. And out here in the East, it's companies like Clearwater, who take thousands and thousands, 16 times more traps on one boat than the average fisherman does, who skirt the rules and get away with it because they can create secret science that changes those rules. It's the RCMP and the police who do nothing while white supremacists attack and destroy Mi'kmaq property and threaten to physically harm Mi'kmaq people. So that really brings me to my thoughts on this. There is a clear system of genocide taking place in Canada. There's no way that we as a country can better ourselves while we're committing that kind of atrocity. It's not clear. This video isn't targeting a Mi'kmaq audience. They know this stuff. They are fully aware of the history of the acts of violence. This video is for people like me who are white and who are not experiencing genocide. Canada has a white supremacy problem, and the only solution is working class, grassroots solidarity. We need to have solidarity with First Nations people. We need to make sure we are ready to hear what those First Nations people need help with. We need to act against that white supremacist violence in our communities. And we need to remember that clearly the government isn't actually there to do it. The government will not stop violence against First Nations people. They are themselves committing it. Until that changes, we need to be acting on the assumption that what's our responsibility is to prevent that violence. One of the easiest ways to prevent that violence is through education early on. Catch people before they fall into the trap of white supremacy. You need to educate people away from hate. But once people are already stuck in that hate, it's not always possible to pull them back out. And so you need to find ways that you as a community can insulate yourself from those people and make sure that those people don't get a chance to harm the people that they've chosen to hate. It's also really important in that case to listen to how the people being oppressed are seeking for that to be dealt with, and to remember that no group is a monolith. So if one person is saying one thing and another person is saying another thing, you have to figure that out, right? You have to listen and hear and just make up your mind for yourself based on what is morally right. I've included some resources in this video description on how to support the Mi'kmaq in the East Coast and the Unistoten in Wet'suwet'en on the West Coast, and I've included all kinds of references. I think I missed a couple, so if I did, just ask me about that, and I'll find it again and I'll throw it in there. But I've got references for basically everything I've said here. And of course, my opinions were my opinions. Thank you to Justine and the Blue Druid for patronizing my videos, and I will see you next time.